אז אני עובר לאנגלית, להרצאה המסכמת שלנו. אולי עוז ירצה להגיד דברי ברכה בעברית, אבל הפייפר שלו בכל מקרה באנגלית. And so thank you everyone here, both here in Tau, and I know we still have quite a few people on the Zoom and on Facebook, so thank you for sticking it out and staying with us until the happy, stimulating it. Okay, I don't know what that was. And so thank you for being here, and thank you also for your patience. I mean, it's been a long evening, but I think it's been very I know it's been very edifying and very stimulating, so thank you for sticking around. And now I want to really invite Professor Oz Frankel to give the final plenary session for this conference. Oz is the chair of the history department at the New School for Social Research in New York City. I'll also add the beloved chair and a beloved lecturer, which I personally can attest to. His recent published work explored Blackness in Israeli history and the reception of American technology by the Israeli Air Force in the late 1960s. He is now completing a book manuscript tentatively titled Coca-Cola, Phantom Jets, and Black Panthers, Israel in the American Orbit, 1967-1973. The title of his talk today is Shlomo Laat's First Mayoral Run and the Commodification of Israeli Politics. And again, I want to thank Oz also for being flexible and considerate, and I want to welcome Oz, and we're looking forward to this. Thank you.
Thank you, Yoav, and hello from Brooklyn. Thank you, Yoav, for this generous introduction, for this wonderful conference that you organized, and for inviting me to share my work. As Yoav said, my presentation today is based on a book project that explores Israeli encounters with American ideas, cultural performances, commercial products, military hardware, and political ideologies at the turn of the 1970s, a period when the two countries became geopolitical allies. Historical episodes from this time period that are pertinent to our conference include, for example, Meir Kahana's arrival in Israel in 1971, and the consequent remaking of the extreme right. Kahana brought with him Southern-style racism, casting the Arab other as a sexual predator. Another episode would be the relationship that Ambassador to Washington, Yitzhak Rabin, began cultivating with evangelical Christians. Also, and much before Bibi and Trump's bromance, Rabin intervened in American presidential politics on behalf of the Republican incumbent, Richard Nixon, during the '72 campaign. But the topic I selected to discuss today represents, I would argue, a more transformative effect that the American gravitational pull had on Israeli politics, left and right. And it brings us back to Shlomo Laat's first mayoral campaign in 1973. Known informally by his childhood nickname Chich, Laat's successful run in Tel Aviv was heralded and sometimes ridiculed as the first American-style political campaign in Israel, in which the personality of the candidates superseded party affiliation or ideological differences. Photogenic, self-confident, gregarious, and recently retired as an IDF general, Laat had his image emblazoned on handbills, billboards, stickers, and buttons. He stood at busy intersections, greeting thousands of potential supporters. Only in his mid-40s, he was running against a sitting mayor, Yoshua Rabinovich, 15 years his elder, and in many ways his opposite, cerebral and profoundly shy, an introvert with crossed eyes and a grim facial expression to boot. Nathan Brun, who organized Laat's run for office, had closely studied American electioneering techniques. He visited campaigns in the United States and read the Road to the White House literature that sprouted up after each presidential contest. Election campaigns in Israel were ineffective, unprofessional, and frankly boring, he surmised. A lawyer and a former journalist, a member of the Herut party, his chance came in early '73, when the Liberal Party in Gachal, which that year turned into the Likud, recruited Laat for the mayoral run. Brun assured Laat that every hand he shook would increase its owner's willingness to vote for him. This is why American political candidates stand outside in -4 degrees to engage the masses, he said. Establishing eye contact and quote-unquote touching the flesh, an expression he learned in the States, were essential psychological tools. That winter, the initiative for direct municipal elections was put on hold, the victim of political skirmishes in the Knesset. But Lahad's campaign wasn't waiting. Its chief slogan was "Apam הבחירה היא אישית," the choice is personal. First, the campaign published enormous newspaper ads in which Lahad introduced himself in word and image, seeking to forge symbolic intimacy and affective ties with prospective voters. He promised that in the months to come, citizens would get to know him better and that, quote, "I will try to get to know you personally in order to understand your problems as a resident of Tel Aviv Jaffa. I would be delighted to invite you to meet me or to tell you about me and my plans. Write me, Shlomo Lahad, Post Office Box 16273, Tel Aviv." This bold invitation concluded with Lahad's handwritten signature. Then came the handshaking drive. Brun wanted 100,000 hands touched. Lahad showed up at the central bus station, discotheques, and swimming pools. As one commentator observed, the style and the man were in rare synchronicity. It's hard to imagine any other early 70s political functionary in Israel going down to the beach, greeting barely clothed, unsuspecting bathers with "Shalom, my name is Chich. I'm candidate for mayor, please vote for me." Some Tel Avivians were reportedly startled when the overzealous candidate approached them, unannounced, with an extended arm. Thousands of visiting cards with Lahad's picture and signature were dispensed. Voters, claims Brun, kept the card and sometimes put it on the TV sets. There were other tricks up his sleeve. Lahad's candidacy was launched with a press conference on top of Migdal Shalom. A Lahad and flower operation dispatched female university students to distribute 10,000 flowers in city streets and cafes. Presenting his plan to address traffic congestion, Lahad challenged Rabinovich to a public debate. There was no precedent for such an exchange, and Rabinovich declined. Meet and greet events, hosted in private homes, Chukei Bayit, also turned out to be incredibly popular, replacing public rallies and further blending the personal, domestic, and social with the political. This setting provided an opportunity to chat informally with a specific group whose particular issues and political inclinations were studied beforehand. The candidate came prepared. Lahad participated in such events almost every night. Brun advised him to speak in short, accessible sentences. Brun fashioned himself to be the first quote-unquote campaign manager in Israeli political history. He gathered a company of professionals, a pollster, a TV expert, a graphic designer, and a spokesperson. Most importantly, and again without precedent, he demanded that the party grant him a clearly defined budget, largely for advertisement, and assure him full discretion to make decisions without interference. Political parties don't know how to run campaigns, he complained. Still in the opposition and without a strong bureaucracy of its own, the Likud was rather conducive to such experimentation. For Rabinovich's team, headed by Yossi Sarid, Lahad's electioneering stunts provided an occasion for scorn. The notion of an American-style campaign was a term of derision, a foreign import, supposedly unsuitable for Israel. Chich was dismissed as a dandy, an inexperienced and superficial candidate, a synthetic personality. They said he was addicted to publicity. After the Yom Kippur War, propaganda on both sides turned only more aggressive and personal. Nevertheless, Rabinovich's team was also populated with public relations executives and pollsters, albeit with tougher merchandise to sell. Rabinovich was reluctant to touch the flesh, but agreed to increase visits across town. A whole battery of labor alignment dignitaries was recruited for meet and greet events. In a last-ditch effort, a Citizens for Rabinovich group was concocted with another retired general at its helm. In the aftermath of the election, some observed that both candidates seemed like marionettes directed by shrewd advertising experts. Asked to confront the allegation that he became, quote unquote, a beauty king, walking in the American style, Lahad demurred, quote, "I don't want to become a pamphlet or a clause in the platform. I'm flesh and blood, alive and breathing, and the citizen whose confidence I seek has a right to know me. So why are we talking about the American style," he said. Truth to be told, it was sometimes hard to distinguish between imported American tactics and Chich's personality, or his generational and military background, his foxy mannerism, chumminess, chevromaniyut, and directness also appeared to emanate from the IDF ethos and the spirit of the 48 generation. Ultimately, Lahad's candidacy rested on the militarization as much as the Americanization of Israeli society. At the turn of the 1970s, generals became much revered and sought after celebrities, and a few parachuted safely into politics. The Liberal Party recruited two generals, Lahad and Arik Sharon, in an effort to strengthen its shaky position within the Likud. Lahad's successful bid for mayor of Tel Aviv was a Watershed Campaign, exposing an emerging confluence of politics and commerce in Israeli public life. One obvious dimension was the methods unleashed to market political candidates in a growingly visual and televisual public sphere. But the nexus of politics and the marketplace ran even deeper. Side by side with commodifying politicians, the voter was reimagined as an autonomous consumer, unshackled by previous party, social, and ideological loyalties, free to make her own choices, always in search of the new. Beyond the individuality of the candidate, therefore, the slogan, "This time the choice is personal," underscored the individuality of the voter, interpolated in Lahad's campaign by the constant use of the singular you, and the visceral bond forged through the real and imagined eye contact, or the tactility of the charismatic touch, the handshake. The general public, however, was conceiving opposite terms. Individuals, voters were aggregated and serialized through statistical categories, while the supposedly autonomous voter exercises judgment and free will. The voter's behavior en masse was deemed measurable and predictable. The 1965 elections saw the first employment of statistical research for political strategy. In the following years, private outfits that gauge consumer taste for new juices and sausages also began measuring, sometimes together, political behavior. By 1973, both Labor Alignment and Gahal Likud used polling extensively to tailor the message and to figure out how to identify and recruit undecided voters. Campaigns reportedly dispatched spies to obtain the rivals' poll results. To better understand this transition, I propose shifting away from the titillating escapades of Brun or Sarid to situate Lahad's campaign in a larger social transformation, namely the emergence of a fully fledged consumerist order in Israel. This order rested on an infrastructure of media, advertisement, new shopping venues, new specialized magazines, as well as new ideological constructs, such as the popular notion of quality of life, echut chaim. Lahad's campaign was one among other, sometimes opposing efforts to fashion the Israeli citizen as a consumer. This was not yet the unbridled consumerism of the 21st century. Consumption was a contested terrain. While the advertisement industry urged Israelis to shop, new state-supported public organizations such as the Israel Consumer Council, Better Home Society, Aguda Letarbut HaDiyur, and the Council for Beautiful Israel sought to protect, civilize, and train the citizen consumer, to instruct her how to gather the proper information, to become familiar with her rights, to speak up, and also to know what aesthetic norms she should adhere to. Consumerist inflected ideas were cast as a foundation for reform and renewal, setting new and high standards of public behavior and sociability, alongside new standards of personal comfort. One example was a number of public drives to clean and beautify shared spaces in Israel. They corresponded to the increased consumption in those years of home detergents, personal hygiene products, and grooming supplies. Public cleanliness was a great passion for Lahat, part of his promise to improve the quality of life in Tel Aviv. Consumerism was accompanied by a number of American-born psychology-infused interpersonal techniques, many of which appeared under the rubric human relations. Lahat provides a great example of the human relations approach. One day into his tenure in City Hall, he seemed hell-bent on campaigning forever. He popped into offices, extending his arm for a handshake, insisted on taking the regular elevator with everyone else, and proposed conferences with groups of municipal workers, a sort of perpetual meet and greet event. He also declared an open door policy. Each week, he would meet with constituents to hear their thoughts, problems, and aspirations. Against the old Mapai era bossism, he promised to abolish protectia and to manage Tel Aviv as a full partnership with voters and city employees. Now, encouraging citizens and employees to articulate their opinions and wishes could indeed manifest a more robust democratic environment. Nevertheless, it was also characteristic of governance tactics, elaborated in the era of high Fordism to increase productivity and labor loyalty. These measures were promoted, for instance, by the Labor Ministry's Productivity Institute that organized human relations training in government departments, factories, the Histadrut, and even kibbutzim. Other outfits offered workshops to facilitate personal growth and improve group dynamics by verbal and nonverbal exchange, including bodily touch. Employers and managers were instructed to maintain an open door with the workers. Labor unrest in the 60s invested the subject with great urgency. Strikes were explained away as a product of bad management and deficient interpersonal communication. Constantly gauging the preferences of voters, workers, and consumers was symptomatic of what I argue was the most significant American import in terms of the 70s Israel, the feedback loop. Even the IDF Tzahal began measuring the preferences of soldiers when it came to food, for instance. In general, after the Six-Day War, the military served as an important conduit for the introduction of American managerial and organizational know-how. In '72, it appointed its first ombudsman, another feedback loop device. Dale Carnegie's self-improvement methods also arrived in Israel. Training focused on honing communication skills, increasing self-confidence, and generating, quote, exuberant personal enthusiasm. In fact, one journalist wrote that without much effort, Lahat was able to engage people much like the archetype Dale Carnegie had described in his iconic book, How to Make Friends and Influence People. Americanization is a term I employ in this and other contexts cautiously and somewhat reluctantly. In Israeli history, there was no single linear process of such acculturation, but many intermittent meeting points, often with inconclusive and ambiguous outcomes. Over the last 5 decades, American culture itself has been in great flux. Still in the late 60s, American practices and ideologies about politics, the self, and society found fertile ground in a nation that, beyond a sense of cohesion born of the military conflict, was already fragmented, already to some extent post-ideological, and was rather confused about its values. Let me conclude. With the 1977 elections, the new commercialized political culture matured and was no longer limited to municipal contests. The Dachaf company, headed by the publicity wizard Eliezer Shwabin, was put fully in charge of the marketing of the Likud. In Lahat's first campaign, just a few years earlier, we can see a glimpse even further into the new liberal future of Israeli politics. Highly professional electioneering, market-inspired campaigns, politicians packaged as celebrities, and celebrities becoming politicians. Thank you.
Okay, so Oz, thank you very much for this final plenary address, and thank you everyone here for sticking it out. I know it's late already, and I really appreciate it. I appreciate the consideration and the respect for us, for Professor Frankel, and that's it. This will all be recorded. It'll be uploaded to our YouTube, and I wish everyone here a wonderful evening. And we're done for tonight. Thank you very much to everyone. עוז, תודה רבה, רבה, ואנחנו עוד נהיה בקשר, ואני מחכה שהספר יצא, שנעשה אירוע רק בשביל הספר, כמו שצריך.
תודה, יואב. תודה לכולם.
נהיה בקשר. ביי ביי.